According to a report, Russia has found vast oil and gas reserves in the Antarctic, much of it in areas claimed by the United Kingdom.
Antarctica is the only place on Earth that remains a true alien world, a silent, white expanse that hides secrets millions of years old. But beneath the permafrost, Russian expeditions have recently pierced a veil that has left the global community in a state of stunned disbelief. From the dark, pressurized depths of Lake Vostok to a staggering energy find that threatens to rewrite global power dynamics, what Russia has uncovered isn't just ice. It is a terrifying glimpse into our planet's future. The abyss beneath the ice. The map of the world is largely considered complete, a finished puzzle of satellite imagery and GPS coordinates. Yet, at the very bottom of the globe, there exists a vertical frontier that remained invisible to human eyes until the late 20th century. For decades, the Russian research station at Vostok was known primarily for being the coldest place on Earth, a desolate outpost where temperatures regularly plummeted to -80 degrees Celsius. But beneath the feet of the scientists living in these corrugated metal shacks lay a secret that would eventually terrify the scientific community. A body of water the size of Lake Ontario, sealed away from the rest of the biosphere for 15 million years. The discovery of Lake Vostok wasn't a sudden eureka moment, but a slow, haunting realization. In the 60s, a Russian pilot and geographer named Andrei Kapitsa noticed a strange, flat patch of ice from the air. It didn't mimic the jagged, undulating terrain of the surrounding glaciers. It was perfectly level, like a frozen mirror. He suspected that something massive was dampening the flow of the ice sheet above. However, it wasn't until the 90s, through a collaboration of Russian and British radar specialists, that the true scale of the discovery was revealed. There wasn't just moisture under the ice, there was a liquid abyss. Imagine a world where the sun has not shone since the middle of the Miocene epoch. While humans were evolving, while empires rose and fell, and while the Industrial Revolution choked the atmosphere with carbon, Lake Vostok sat in total, crushing darkness. The ice sheet sitting on top of it is nearly 4 kilometers thick, roughly 2.5 miles of solid, ancient water. The pressure at the bottom is immense, roughly 350 times that of sea level. Under normal circumstances, water would be a solid block of ice at these temperatures, but the geothermal heat from the Earth's core and the insulating blanket of the glacier keep Lake Vostok liquid. It is a subglacial lake, a pocket of the deep past trapped in a pressure cooker. The terror began when the Russian team at Vostok Station started drilling. The project, known as the 5G1 hole, was a feat of engineering that bordered on the impossible. The drillers weren't just fighting the cold, they were fighting the physics of the ice itself. As they descended deeper, the ice became more plastic, threatening to snap the drill bits or seize the machinery. By the time they reached the accretion ice, the layer just above the liquid water, the tension in the international community was palpable. NASA and various environmental groups pleaded with the Russian team to stop. The fear was simple. If we pierced the ceiling of Lake Vostok, we might contaminate a pristine ecosystem with surface bacteria. Or worse, release something from the deep that the modern world was not prepared to handle. But the Russians pushed on. In February 2012, after decades of stop-and-start drilling, the bit finally broke through. The water of the lake, under extreme pressure, rushed up into the borehole like a geyser, freezing instantly into a plug that sealed the lake back up. It was a surgical strike into the unknown. When the researchers finally hauled the samples of that frozen lake water back to the surface, what they found defied standard biological classification. Analysis of the ice revealed DNA sequences that didn't match anything in the global databases. They found evidence of extremophiles, organisms that thrive in conditions that would kill any other life form. Some of these bacteria appeared to be multicellular, complex organisms that had adapted to live in a world of high oxygen. The lake is supersaturated with it, and zero light. There were whispers of Bacteria 1T, a life form that shared less than 86% of its DNA with any known species. In the world of genetics, that is a chasm. It's the difference between a human and a mushroom. The discovery was terrifying because it proved that life doesn't just survive in the dark. It evolves into something entirely alien. The Russian discovery shattered the idea that Antarctica was a dead continent. Instead, it revealed that we are walking on top of a massive pressurized laboratory of unknown biology. If these organisms were to find their way into our oceans through melting ice or shifting tectonic plates, the ecological consequences are unpredictable. We aren't just looking at a lake. We are looking at a biological time capsule that has been ticking for 15 million years, and Russia just pulled the pin. The mystery of what swims in the dark is only the beginning of the story, as the focus shifts from the biology of the past to the resources of the future. Echoes of a lost world. The true terror of the Vostok discovery lies not in the silence of the ice, but in the noise of the data. When the Russian team finally analyzed the first liquid samples from the lake's surface, they weren't just looking at water. They were looking at a biological vacuum that had been suddenly, violently breached after 15 million years of isolation. In the laboratories of the Arctic and Antarctic Research Institute in St. Petersburg, the results were chilling. Among the thousands of genetic sequences identified, a significant portion belonged to organisms that are completely unknown to modern science. These aren't just new species in the way a new beetle might be found in the Amazon. These are entire branches of the tree of life that have been growing in a different direction since the Miocene epoch. One specific phylotype, identified as Bacteria 1T, sent shockwaves through the global community. It shared less than 86% of its DNA with any known life form on the surface. To put that in perspective, humans share roughly 98% of their DNA with chimpanzees and nearly 50% with bananas. A gap of 14% is a biological chasm that suggests we are looking at a form of life that evolved under entirely different physical laws. The terror here is twofold: the threat of biological contamination and the Pandora's box of ancient pathogens. The lake is a high-pressure, oxygen-rich environment, a super-saturated world where oxygen levels are 50 times higher than in typical freshwater lakes. Any organism that can survive there is, by definition, an ultimate survivor. Scientists worry that if these extremophiles were introduced to our world, they might outcompete modern bacteria or possess biochemical properties that our immune system simply cannot process. The Russian scientists who spent their careers chasing this ghost, men like Valery Lukin, who headed the expedition for decades, faced more than just scientific skepticism. They faced the psychological toll of the pole of cold. For these researchers, Lake Vostok wasn't just a data point. It was a career-defining obsession. They lived in a place where the air is so thin it feels like breathing through a straw, and where the sun disappears for months. This isolation breeds a certain kind of intensity. When they finally touched the water of Vostok, they weren't just discovering a lake. They were reaching back into a version of Earth that shouldn't exist anymore. Yet, as the biological mystery deepened, a new and perhaps more immediate terror began to emerge from the Russian data. While one half of the team was looking at ancient life, the other half, under the banner of the state-owned company Rosgeo, was looking at what lay beneath the seabed of the Southern Ocean. They found evidence of something even more complex. The presence of DNA from multicellular eukaryotes, complex organisms, indicated that Lake Vostok might not just be a soup of microbes. There are theories, supported by the presence of certain DNA fragments, that the lake could host a thermal vent ecosystem. At the bottom of this lightless abyss, tectonic activity might be creating heat and chemical energy, supporting a food chain that includes everything from tube worms to perhaps even blind, pale, fish-like creatures that have never seen a photon of light. The world watched as the Russian team pulled up canisters of water that could theoretically contain the biological equivalent of a slow-motion wildfire. If these organisms were to find their way into our oceans through melting ice or shifting tectonic plates, the ecological consequences are unpredictable. We aren't just looking at a lake. We are looking at a biological time capsule that has been ticking for 15 million years. And Russia just pulled the pin. The realization that we are walking on top of a massive, pressurized laboratory of unknown biology has changed the way we view the continent. It is no longer just a wall of ice. It is a lid on a world that might be better left alone. But as the scientists wrestled with the ethics of their discovery, the focus of the Kremlin shifted from the microbes in the water to the riches in the rock. The silent mystery of the deep frozen lake was soon overshadowed by a discovery that would set the world's corridors of power on fire. The ghost of a trillion-dollar industry. The 511 billion barrel ghost. While the biological mysteries of the deep frozen lake have captured the scientific imagination, a far more immediate and explosive revelation has emerged from the icy waters of the Weddell Sea. In a series of reports that began to surface in May 2024 and dominated the geopolitical discourse through 2025, it was revealed that Russian seismic surveys had pinpointed something under the Antarctic seabed that terrified the world's energy markets. The figure was staggering: 511 billion barrels of oil. To understand the sheer gravity of this number, one must compare it to the giants of the industry. This single find is nearly double the proven reserves of Saudi Arabia and roughly 10 times the total output generated by the North Sea over the last 50 years. This wasn't just a discovery. It was the identification of a global energy supergiant hidden beneath the one place on Earth where extraction is strictly, legally forbidden. The discovery was made by the Alexander Karpinsky, a specialized polar research vessel operated by Rosgeo, Russia's state-owned geological exploration agency. For several seasons, the ship had been meticulously mapping the hydrocarbon potential of the British Antarctic territory, a triangular slice of the continent also claimed by Chile and Argentina. While Moscow officially maintains that its activities are purely scientific, the nature of the seismic data collected suggests a far more pragmatic motive. Unlike traditional scientific research, which might study the movements of ice or the history of the Earth's crust, the surveys conducted by the Alexander Karpinsky focused specifically on the sedimentary basins known to hold oil and gas. This has led experts, including Professor Klaus Dodds, a leading voice in polar geopolitics, to warn that Russia is no longer just studying the ice. It is effectively prospecting for the next century's wealth. The terror inspired by this 511 billion barrel ghost is not merely environmental, though the prospect of an oil spill in the pristine Southern Ocean is a haunting nightmare for ecologists. Rather, the fear is that this discovery acts as a detonator for the Antarctic Treaty System. Since 1959, the continent has been a unique natural reserve devoted to peace and science, with the 1991 Madrid Protocol placing an indefinite ban on all mining and oil activities. However, the protocol is due for a potential review in 2048. By mapping these reserves now, Russia has essentially placed a reserved sign on the continent, signaling to the world that when the treaty eventually thaws, the race for the bottom of the world will be led by the Kremlin. For a Russia currently squeezed by Western sanctions and looking for long-term strategic leverage, these reserves represent a Plan B that could eventually break the back of global energy dependence on the Middle East and the West. Furthermore, the revelation has ignited a dormant territorial fuse. The Weddell Sea, where the majority of the oil is located, is a flashpoint of overlapping sovereignty. The United Kingdom, Chile, and Argentina all maintain historical claims to this specific region, and none of them are prepared to see a rival power or a state-owned Russian giant systematically inventory the riches they believe are rightfully theirs. In response to the Russian reports, Chile and Argentina have already increased their naval presence and held emergency meetings at their respective Antarctic bases. The 511 billion barrel ghost has turned what was once a collaborative scientific frontier into a high-stakes chessboard where the moves are made in seismic pings and diplomatic warnings. The world is terrified because, for the first time in 60 years, the white continent is being viewed through the lens of industrial greed rather than scientific wonder. Technically, the extraction of these resources remains a feat of extreme engineering that is currently beyond human capability. The Weddell Sea is home to some of the most dangerous waters on the planet, where massive icebergs can crush hulls and hurricane-force winds make traditional drilling platforms impossible. Yet, the mere existence of the data changes the psychology of the region. It creates a resource fever that is hard to cure. If one nation begins to prepare for a post-treaty world of extraction, others will feel compelled to do the same to avoid being left behind. This is the true danger of the Russian discovery. It hasn't just found oil, it has found the precise mechanism to dismantle 70 years of international peace. The silent, frozen landscape is now haunted by the prospect of derricks and pipelines, a vision of the future that feels like a betrayal of the continent's very purpose. As the geopolitical heat rises, the world's attention has begun to shift back to the people on the ground, those living at the edge of the world, caught between the pursuit of knowledge and the weight of their nation's ambitions. Beyond the billion-dollar figures and the ancient microbes are the humans who actually live in this freezer, men and women whose daily survival is as precarious as the treaties they represent. The geopolitical thaw, the true terror of the Russian discovery in Antarctica, is not merely a product of seismic data or ancient microbes. It is also reflected in the human endurance required to uncover them. To understand how Russia achieved these revelations, one must look at the lives of those stationed at Vostok. Established in 1957, Vostok Station sits atop the East Antarctic ice sheet, roughly 1,301 kilometers from the geographic South Pole. It is a place where the concept of a career takes on a survivalist dimension. The station is located at the southern pole of cold, where the atmosphere is so thin due to the 3,488-meter elevation that new arrivals often suffer from altitude sickness for weeks, struggling to perform even the simplest tasks. Here, the air contains nearly 50% less oxygen than at sea level, making every breath a conscious effort and every step a physical gamble. The researchers who inhabit this station, the Vostochniki, are a breed apart. Their careers are forged in a world where the sun vanishes for 4 months of the year, plunging the station into a permanent, frozen midnight. During these long winter months, the station is completely inaccessible. No aircraft can land because the hydraulic fluids in their landing gear would freeze and shatter. No overland traverse can reach them across the 1,400 kilometers of jagged ice. The 15 to 30 men who remain are essentially the most isolated humans in the universe, more cut off from help than the astronauts on the International Space Station. For scientists like Vladimir Lipenkov or the late Boris Kudryashov, the career path to Vostok often began in the rigorous mining and engineering institutes of St. Petersburg and Moscow, where they specialized in the physics of ice and the mechanics of deep borehole drilling. Daily life at Vostok is a meticulous battle against entropy. The station is powered by diesel generators that must never fail, as a loss of heat at minus 80 degrees Celsius would lead to death within hours. Water is not found. It is manufactured by melting snow in large tanks, a task that falls to the duty officer of the day. The diet is high in calories and fat to combat the body's constant struggle to maintain core temperature, with meals often consisting of tinned meats, heavy porridges, and the occasional luxury of a fermented vegetable. Professional roles are fluid. A world-class glaciologist might spend his morning analyzing 400,000-year-old ice cores and his afternoon shoveling snow away from the station's ventilation shafts. This lack of hierarchy is born of necessity. In a place where nature is actively trying to kill you, the only resume that matters is the one that proves you can keep the heaters running. The psychological toll on these scientists is a subject of intense study by the Russian Arctic and Antarctic Research Institute. The social monotony of seeing the same dozen faces for a year in a confined, metallic environment leads to a unique psychological state known as Antarctic tension. Career longevity at Vostok is rare. Many scientists do 1 or 2 winter overs and never return, their bodies and minds exhausted by the sensory deprivation. Yet, there are the lifers, men who have spent decades returning to the ice, driven by a devotion to the secrets buried 4 kilometers below. They are the ones who managed the 5G1 drilling project, a machine that became a living entity to them, requiring constant maintenance, lubrication, and surgical precision to avoid contaminating the lake they were so desperate to reach. These men are the vanguard of Russia's Antarctic ambitions. While the world sees 511 billion barrels of oil as a geopolitical threat, the Vostochniki see it as the result of decades of grueling labor in the dark. Their careers are built on the premise that Antarctica is not a wasteland, but a storehouse. As Russia began a massive upgrade to the station in 2024 and 2025, hauling thousands of tons of new equipment across the ice by tractor train, the message was clear. They are moving from temporary exploration to permanent occupation. The new wintering complex, a modular structure resembling a futuristic space station, is designed to house researchers in relative comfort, signaling that the era of heroic survival is being replaced by an era of industrial-scale presence. But as these scientists settle into their new high-tech home, the terror they have uncovered begins to leak out from the laboratory and into the global political arena. The transition from scientific discovery to national asset is never a smooth one, especially when the asset in question is the last unclaimed territory on the planet. The melting lid. If the discovery of oil was a threat to the world's politics, Russia's latest data on the Antarctic seabed is a threat to the world's very survival. For decades, scientists believed that the permafrost of the Arctic was the only major source of dormant methane, a greenhouse gas 30 times more potent than carbon dioxide. But in late 2024, Russian seismic survey ships, operating in tandem with deep-sea submersibles, identified something that has left the climate community in a state of paralysis. They found that the Antarctic seabed is leaking. This phenomenon, known as methane seeping, occurs when gas trapped in the Earth's crust, held down by the immense weight and cold of the Southern Ocean, begins to escape through the sediment. The Russian teams at the Bellingshausen station were the first to report massive plumes of bubbles rising from the depths. These are not small, isolated leaks. They are methane flares, some extending hundreds of meters toward the surface. The terror lies in the mechanism. As the Southern Ocean warms, the lid of the planet is essentially being unscrewed. The Russian data suggests that these seeps are appearing at an accelerating rate. Using sonar mapping, researchers have identified pockmarks on the ocean floor, craters the size of city blocks, where the gas has literally exploded out of the seabed. When this gas reaches the atmosphere, It creates a positive feedback loop that could lead to runaway warming. Russia's discovery proves that Antarctica is no longer a heat sink. It is becoming a heat source. For the researchers on the academic Fedorov, the sight of the water boiling with methane bubbles in the middle of a sub-zero storm was a moment of profound dread. It revealed that the continent's stability is a myth. We are walking on a pressurized bomb, and Russia is currently the only nation with the seismic infrastructure to hear the fuse burning. This discovery is terrifying because it implies that even if we stop every car and factory on Earth tomorrow, the Antarctic lid might already be too loose to tighten. What Russia has uncovered is the first evidence of a regime shift in the Southern Ocean. The silent, white expanse is hiding a volatile interior that is beginning to exhale. This isn't just science, it is a planetary warning. The Russian revelation of these seeps has turned Antarctica from a distant curiosity into the front line of a global emergency, proving that what happens at the bottom of the world never stays there. The Fortress of the Führer. While modern headlines are dominated by oil reserves and biological anomalies, there is a darker, more psychological terror that has long obsessed Russian explorers and historians: the myth of a secret Nazi redoubt. This narrative, often dismissed as fringe conspiracy, gained renewed gravity in the late 20th and early 21st centuries as Russian seismic surveys began mapping the literal inner space of the continent. The legend centers on Station 211, or New Berlin, a supposed underground fortress built by the Third Reich in the late 30s. The root of this fear is grounded in historical fact. In 1938, the German vessel Schwabenland arrived in the Dronning-Maud land region, launching seaplanes that dropped thousands of aluminum swastika-emblazoned poles to claim the territory as Neuschwabenland. Russian archival research has often highlighted a chilling quote from Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz in 1943, who boasted that his submarine fleet had created an unassailable fortress for the Führer at the other end of the world. For Russian strategists, this wasn't just wartime bravado. It was a prompt to look closer at the geography of the ice. When Russian scientists began mapping the region's geothermal activity, they discovered something that breathed new life into these old ghosts: a network of massive volcanic caves. Some of these subglacial caverns are large enough to house entire cities, kept warm by the Earth's internal heat, despite the minus 60 degrees Celsius temperatures on the surface. While there is no credible evidence of flying saucers or a hidden Nazi empire, the seismic reality is terrifying enough. It proves that Antarctica is not a solid block of ice, but a hollowed-out, honeycombed landscape capable of concealing significant human or military infrastructure. The true terror that Russia has uncovered isn't a literal fortress of the past, but the realization of how easily such a thing could exist. If the Nazis could dream of a secret base in the 40s, modern powers, including Russia and China, possess the technology to make it a reality today. By exploring the thermal anomalies of the fortress myths, Russia has mapped the perfect locations for future deep-state installations hidden forever beneath miles of shielding ice. The myth of the past has become a blueprint for the clandestine military expansion of the future. The transition from historical myth to modern strategic reality brings us to our final consideration of the continent's ultimate fate: the final frontier of Earth. The revelation of Russia's findings in Antarctica represents more than just a scientific breakthrough. It is a profound disruption of our understanding of Earth's last sanctuary. As we have seen, the discovery of a pressurized, alien ecosystem in Lake Vostok suggests that the biological history of our planet is far more complex and potentially more dangerous than we ever dared to imagine. These ancient microbes, isolated for 15 million years, serve as a reminder that the white continent is not a frozen tomb, but a living, breathing laboratory. The biological terror lies in the unknown, the risk that by simply observing this world, we have already begun a process of contamination that could ripple through the global ecosystem in ways we cannot yet predict. However, as the focus shifts from the laboratory to the seabed, the terror takes on a more familiar human form, the hunger for energy and power. The identification of 511 billion barrels of oil beneath the Weddell Sea has effectively ended the era of Antarctic exceptionalism. For over 60 years, the Antarctic Treaty System held the world to a higher standard, proving that humanity could choose science over extraction and peace over competition. But the Russian surveys of 2024 and 2025 have placed a massive, undeniable weight on those diplomatic scales. The world is terrified because it knows that the allure of such wealth has, historically, been enough to melt even the strongest international agreements. We are now entering a period of geopolitical thaw that mirrors the physical melting of the ice sheets. As nations like Russia and China expand their presence and modernize their stations, they are not just preparing for more science, they are positioning themselves for a future where the 1991 Madrid Protocol is a relic of the past. The career scientists at Vostok and the sailors on the Alexander Karpinsky are the pioneers of this new age, working at the literal edge of human endurance to map a prize that the world may not be ready to handle. The terror is the realization that the last pristine place on Earth is now firmly in the crosshairs of industrial civilization. Ultimately, what Russia has uncovered in Antarctica is a mirror. It reflects our greatest scientific curiosity and our most persistent greed. Whether we choose to protect the ancient life in the deep lakes or exploit the ancient carbon in the rocks will be the defining test of the 21st century. Antarctica has spent millions of years in silence, but now that Russia has forced it to speak, the whole world is listening with a sense of mounting dread. The ice is no longer just a barrier, it is a countdown. The story of the Antarctic discovery is still being written in the laboratories of St. Petersburg and the halls of the UN. Don't miss the next update. Subscribe to stay informed on the secrets they don't want you to know.